So the text we read today is scary. The temple will be destroyed, a nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom, earthquake and famines, and that's just the beginning. It's the birth pangs. It is clear from this text that something big and monumental will come to an end and something new will begin. And I'm sure this text will inspire all kinds of visions that the world will end next Tuesday at 5, or a week after when nothing happens next Tuesday. And when it's not Tuesday, it might be Thursday or Monday. But it will be wild, and people will be taken up to heaven, away from the misery, and others will be tossed aside and left behind, and they will suffer, and that all happens next Saturday. The secret Bible code reveals this beyond a shadow of a doubt, and when it's not Saturday, then it's when the next comet comes, or when the moon is in the 7th house, or when the Maya calendar comes to an end. We all know these predictions of doom. We hear them all the time. And St. Paul, of all people, was probably the first who was convinced that Jesus Christ will come back in his lifetime. That was 2,000 years ago. And since Paul, we saw 5 gazillion predictions that the world will end, and nothing ever happened. Remember when the Maya calendar came to an end a couple of time ago? Doomsday, 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 and then the Maya calendar did what it was designed to do by the Mayans. It went back to 1 and started a new circle of counting time. So, do not be afraid. I'm not sure how clear I can make this. Fear is not warranted when it comes to God. God is loving. God is graceful. No one will be tossed aside or left behind because that would neither be loving nor graceful. So, do not be afraid. Since Martin Luther, this is basically the only purpose of our gatherings here, to take aware your fear that God is as volatile and unsteady and psychopathic as the prophets of doom make God out to be. Remember that their track record of predicting what God's will is and what God will do next Tuesday is abysmal. A guy with a glass bowl on a Renaissance fair has a better chance of predicting the future than those who say they cracked the secret Bible code, because the hit rate of those guys is a solid and absolute 0. Nothing. Or in strictly theological terms, zilch. So, do not be afraid. Let me repeat that. Do not be afraid. On the other hand, change is never easy and it is always scary. Doubt and fear, as well as excitement and enthusiasm, are part of the process of change. Something that we are very familiar with comes to an end and something new and unknown begins. And while we go through the process of change, many people think fondly of the good old times when everything was so much easier and so much less scary. At least that is how we remember the good old times. Sure, this and many other congregations had more warm bodies in the pews, but the good old times were scary and uncertain, as our times are now. The good old times were neither old nor good when people were living through it. World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Cold War, Cuba crisis, oil crisis, the list of crises is endless. Were those the good old times? Those good old times were also full of prophets of doom who predicted next Tuesday, finito. And often, the times merited pessimism. Sometimes in the 70s, the Russians had a glitch in their air defense warning system. On their radar screens, they saw us coming for them. There was just one guy who said, the Americans are not that stupid. Capitalists know what's good for them, and all-out nuclear war is bad for business. And so he didn't press the button like he was supposed to do, and then they found the glitch. We came really, really, really close to prove the prophets of doom right. Life is complicated, no matter when. You always have to make decisions that are healthy and that are ethical. Like the Russian guy in the bunker who was staring at that big button that was labeled "End of History." Jesus didn't say, pick up your picnic basket and follow the angels who will lead you to a place with a view where you will sip champagne and the little birdies will sing to you as if you were in a Walt Disney movie. He said, pick up your crosses and follow me. And where Jesus went, trouble went with him. Change went with him. Temples came to an end. Social hierarchies crumbled. Life changed through Jesus Christ when he preached God's never-ending love for us and commanded us to love God and to love our neighbors. And this has at all times been something people needed time to stomach. For the early church, for instance, that was accepting Gentiles into the fold. Strange, unclean barbarians that you were supposed to treat as if they were righteous, law-abiding Jews. That required them to throw out some very cherished cultural assumptions. And it took some doing, and it was accompanied by some major birth pangs until that concept became normality. Eating with someone is no big deal for us. It can be more or less pleasant depending on the person who sits with you at the table. But for the early church, this was a profoundly moral question. They were still very Jewish, and eating with ritually unclean people was against the purity law. It made you unclean if you did it, and maintaining ritual purity was seen as a religious obligation. Today, we experience, I think, the biggest social change in recent memory. We see anger throughout the land because people notice that America changes. The idea of the good old times means for many a white Protestant land. It took some time until Roman Catholic Irish people and Italians were included into that mainstream. Maybe you remember that discussion. Who was in the White House in the early 60s? John F. Kennedy or the Pope? What else do we remember from those good old times? Lynching black people had virtually no legal consequences in the 60s. American Indians did not exist. Gay people went to jail. Women fetched beer and slippers. Today, the gradual change we experience since the civil rights movement has become much more urgent. People of color rightfully demand full equality. Spanish is a lingua franca in the Southwest. Recent immigrants do not always look and behave like white Protestant males. Women demand the same opportunities and pay as men. LGBT plus people demand full inclusion. Young people demand that we give up our carbon addiction and that we change our economic and political system in radical ways. And they define their identity as they fit. Male, female, transgender, fluent, and many things I don't understand and probably forgot to mention. But it is absolutely clear that those young people do not ask us, please, 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 if you would be so kind to let us do our thing. No, they demand that we change our attitudes, not slowly over time as we are comfortable, but now. Our temple is crumbling. It's only a matter of time until the stones are overturned and something new emerges. The demographic reality of the 21st century changes America, whether we like that or not. And this change will be profound. And it is no wonder that so many people are up in arms and angrily demand the good old times back. But let me assure you, the good old times will not come back. The only question is, will the birth pangs of the new be devastating, destructive, and violent, or will we be helpful, curious, and compassionate as young generation builds a new world on the principles of sustainability and equity? Nothing will turn the clock back. Nothing was ever able to turn the clock back. They crucified Jesus, but that did not stop Christ. On the contrary, the resurrected Christ had more power than the poor itinerant preacher Jesus ever had. And now let me turn back to the beginning. This is not the doomsday of America. What we are going through right now is a normal historical process. It happened before, it will happen again. So, do not be afraid. God is still loving. God is still graceful. Do not be afraid. We are not losing something, we're gaining something, new friends, new insight, new wisdom, no purpose, a new manifestation of God being active in history, and a renewed commitment to the age-old commandment of God to love God and to love our neighbors. Most revolutionary concepts are quite easy to understand, but change is hard. November is Native American Heritage Month. The question of our relationship to our Native American neighbors is a very open one. We do not exist with each other. We exist beside each other. We're here, they're there, and we cover all the wounds that separate us with smiles and friendliness. And we can go on living in parallel worlds for the foreseeable future. But God calls us to make lasting peace with each other. We are called to love Native Americans as our neighbors. And when we follow God's call to be blessed peacemakers and sincerely try to love them, we cannot but feel their pain as our own pain. And feeling their pain will cost us something, because we will be required to look at us and at our history through their eyes. We will have to look, and we will have to see, and we will have to hear and feel. We have to admit that we are part of the historical and contemporary forces that inflicted and inflict injustice and pain on our Native American neighbors. And when we are courageous enough to look at ourselves through Native eyes, then we might be able to begin a new relationship that is built on respect, genuine goodwill, and love of neighbor. I say we might be able because building relationships requires two parties. Maybe they are open to a new relationship with us, maybe they are not. But however that might be, going through the process of feeling the pain and telling the truth is a necessary first step for us, because only that puts us in a state in which a new relationship is possible. It sounds like a tall order. It is one of many tall orders, but do not be afraid. God always leads us in the direction of love and of life. Following Christ, we shoulder a cross. And sometimes a cross can be extremely heavy as we haul it along the way. But, Jesus said, "My cross is light." So maybe our cross is not as heavy as it looks or as we imagine it to be. But if we see it through and keep trucking, the destination we're heading towards is peace, grace, and love. Amen.